Welcome to Not for Pie Eaters. I'm John Dougal. Today we're going to discuss misandry in society, and we'll look at some disturbing aspects of society that I've been researching. I'll share what I've found so far. It's not pretty. Societal disdain and outright hatred for men has been growing for several decades and infiltrated our institutions. Let's start with television. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, popular television shows often portrayed a family or societal patriarch in a positive way. You'd watch the show and the older men were masculine leaders who brought stability, love, and prosperity and protection. The men were brave and confident and stoic and wise. They led their families. They protected society. Father Knows Best was one such show. Jim Anderson was the wise father who cared for his family. And other shows existed. Westerns were popular in this time period. Gunsmoke was one where the main character was Marshall Dillon. Bonanza was another where Ben Cartwright was the patriarch. Today, there's no chance you'd see these shows. The themes don't fit the popular narratives. Today, apart from action films, men are either beasts or schlubs. Misandry definitely applies today. It's the contempt, prejudice, and disdain for men. And it's not a word that's used commonly in popular culture. Misogyny is a popular buzzword, but not misandry. For years, I've wondered if feminism has played a role in the acceptability of degrading and hating men. And it would take extensive research to actually try to prove that as a hypothesis and form a solid, well-reasoned opinion. And I haven't gone that far. I've not come across a book that lays it all out, so I've poked about here and there on my own, just collecting raw data and seeing what it shows. And I started with the possibility of a rooted misandry and radical feminism. So I went to Wikipedia and found out who the founders were for radical feminism. Then I went to AZ Quotes and looked to see what they had to say. And that's an awful simple start, and by no means would I say I have strong conclusions. From that bit of research, I'd say I have strong inclinations, but I wouldn't go so far as to put my neck out and say, oh yeah, yea, verily, here's the truth. And the other thing is that regarding feminism, radical feminism is a faction of feminism. It's a subset. So you'd never want to fall into the trap of black and white thinking by looking at the radical feminists and then say, oh yeah, and what they believe applies to all feminism. Per a 2020 Pew Research poll, 61% of U.S. women call themselves feminists today. And what does that mean to be a feminist? I seriously doubt there's a huge amount of uniformity to what that definition would be. So, I have zero issue with anyone who feels that feminism is about equality and it's about fair treatment. These things are completely reasonable, and we need free choice. Freedom is a basic psychological need, and we need to feel safe in our environments. Who would want to feel threatened day to day? So when we're not, we're at our best when we feel free to pursue the activities we're suited for. So let's look at the radical feminism without black and white thinking and see what's there. A good place to start is just to look at the various waves of feminism. You've got the first wave feminism that started in the early 19th century, and it focused primarily on a woman's right to vote. No issues there. Second wave feminism was a period of activity that began in the early 1960s and lasted for roughly 2 decades. It focused on patriarchal institutions and cultural practices, and it called for a radical reordering of society to eliminate male supremacy. There were three key thoughts that emerged in the second wave feminism. There's a liberal thought, a socialist thoughts, and then the radical feminist thoughts. And it's specifically in radical feminism that appears misandry may have seeped into modern society. There could have been other things that pushed it, but that's what we're looking at. So we'll take a look and see what the radical feminists, the second wave, had to say. We'll start with Robin Morgan. From Wikipedia, Robin Morgan is an American poet, writer, activist, journalist, lecturer, and a former child actor. And since the early 1960s, she was a radical feminist member of the American women's movement and a leader in the international feminist movement. Quote, "I feel that man-hating is an honorable and viable political act, that the oppressed have a right to class hatred against the class that is oppressing them." Class hatred, that's hating all men. Well, how is man-hating manifested, and how does it help achieve the goals of second wave feminism? And has the hatred affected our institutions? Next up is Andrea Dworkin. She was an American radical feminist writer and activist, best known for her analysis of pornography. With a little research, you'll find that Ms. Dworkin was sexually abused when she was younger, and perhaps that was an influence upon her. Let's see what she had to say. "Marriage as an institution developed from rape as a practice." Wow, what an awful and misguided opinion that marriage came about as an institution from repeated felonies. That's a bold statement, but where's the proof? European, and for that matter, Western culture arose from a Judeo-Christian ethos, and the Old Testament patriarchs were quite clear on justice for women who suffered rape. In Deuteronomy chapter 22, for example, if out in the country a man happens to meet a young woman pledged to be married and rapes her, only the man who has done this shall die. Do nothing to the woman. She has committed no sin deserving death. The betrothed woman screamed, and there was no one to rescue her. Well, hardly would such a law lead to a society where it views rape as an acceptable practice. Let's look at what else Ms. Dworkin believed. Heterosexual intercourse is the pure, formalized expression of contempt for women's bodies. So, with Ms. Dworkin's views, there's never a union between a man and a woman that can be beautiful and enriching. Sheila Cronin was a leader of the Feminist National Organization for Women, or abbreviated NOW. Since marriage constitutes slavery for women, it's clear that the women's movement must concentrate on attacking this institution. Freedom for women cannot be won without the abolition of marriage. Interesting. The abolition of marriage will make women free. Sally Miller Gerhardt. She was an American teacher, feminist, science fiction writer, and political activist. The proportion of men must be reduced to and maintained at approximately 10% of the human race. Well, for Sally Miller Gerhardt, bring on the genocide. Class hatred doesn't get much worse than that. And it's easy to find more quotes. These are just a few. Third wave feminism came about in the early 1990s, and the only reason I bring it up is to say, hey, did the misandry of the second wave feminists continue into the third and fourth wave? Well, third wave feminism brought, the current theories such as intersectionality, sex positivity, trans feminism, and postmodern feminism. And I'll just mention a little bit on intersectionality and postmodernism. Intersectionality looks at discrimination, oppression, and privilege by dicing and slicing society into various intersectional groups. At the top of the privilege totem pole are college-educated men born to affluence, especially white men in positions of leadership. A bit tongue-in-cheek, but at the bottom of the totem pole could be something like a transsexual dwarf, multi-ethnic feminist activist. You get the point. The wealthy heterosexual patriarchs are the boogeymen, and the oppressed to various degrees are everyone else, but especially non-white women and non-heterosexuals. So intersectionality is all about oppression and victimhood, and playing the victim is manipulative because it garners sympathy and avoids personal accountability. Well, then there's the feminist postmodernism. And the goal of postmodernism is to destabilize the wretched patriarchy. So, in summary, the goal of the third wave feminism is basically the demonization of men for the purpose of increasing power to women, minorities, and non-heterosexuals. I won't go into the fourth wave, but it's basically more of the same. With all of this in mind, let's look at societal institutions and see if there's been any headway with the stated goals of the radical feminists who've demonstrated hatred towards men. We'll start with family court, since the abolition of marriage was deemed a necessary goal. The photo shown is a sculpture at Collect Pond Park, and the park is adjacent to the New York Family Courthouse at 60 Lafayette Street in Manhattan, and the sculpture faces towards the courthouse. It's titled Medusa with the Head of Perseus, and was created by Argentine-Italian artist Luciano Garbati. The sculpture is a twist on the mythical story, except that the roles are reversed. Medusa has the severed head of Perseus in her hand. In my opinion, Medusa just as may well have had the scale in her hand instead of a sword, standing next to the family law courthouse. It's not an appropriate message for justice where there's supposed to be a presumption of fairness, but the message is clear. Killing men in court is justice. There's a great deal of information on family court. It's easy to find. You can go out and look. But for continuity, I'll just bring up a little bit of background information, one example. And I picked a local example, a family law attorney in Bellevue, Washington, Lisa Scott. As a precursor to what Lisa had to say, the cornerstone of modern family law in America is the Violence Against Women's Act, or VAWA. It's worth knowing about. It provides gobs of federal money to various organizations across the country in support of women in family law court. And the foundation for the federal act is the Duluth Power Model, which is a questionable study in my mind. From attorney Lisa Scott's website, to assure victory in the divorce custody case, the woman claims that the man is an abuser, no matter how good of a husband or father he is. So VAWA is not about stopping violence, it's about greedy special interests slopping at the federal trough, perpetuating gender supremacy for women. If proponents were truly concerned about helping victims, they would demand that all intervention and funding be gender neutral and gender inclusive. The reason for that is obvious, is that both women and men can commit violence against each other. I'll continue with the quote from Lisa Scott. What we really have here is MAWA, Men Annoying Women Act. The man is either a relentless abuser or a hopeless wimp. Any modern man not terrified of being in a relationship with a woman has not been paying attention. So Lisa Scott is confirming that Sheila Cronin's plan has been successful. Family court has become a place that supports the abolition of marriage by tipping the scales of justice solidly in the favor of women, thereby making marriage a horrible proposition for men. I've heard other attorneys' views, including one that said that a family court views men as nothing more than sperm donors who try to get out of child support payments. Women are angels, men are devils. For any man in a relationship or desiring to be in a relationship, I strongly suggest you do a little research on family court, since more than half of the marriages end in divorce, and since 80% of the dissolution of marriage petitioners are women. And food for thought, but women are more eager to file for divorce when they feel they can get favorable treatment. Okay, now let's look at education. We've spoken on education in the last video in the series, how 40 years ago university attendance was about 50-50 men and women, and today women are outnumbering men 2-1. There's lots of possible reasons that you could come up with, as hypothesis as to why that is. And I'm going to give my inclination. I wouldn't say it's a belief, but it's an inclination. Richard Whitmore wrote a book on the root problem about 10 years ago, and it's called Why Boys Fail. And he would lay the root problem, was a shift in K-12 education, where the shift was on to communication. And we covered female development in the video on intrinsic women. At age 2, little girls' bodies are flooded with estrogen, and that event rewires their brains and optimizes their ability to communicate. Well, nothing like this happens with a little boy. And so what's the result? Well, when you watch little girls and little boys play, little girls are busy communicating, playing pretend games, whereas little boys are basically grunting, making truck motor noises. Okay, so now you take these talkers and grunters, you put them in the same elementary school class, and then emphasize communication in the curricula and in grading. It's called Girls Win, Boys Lose. Well, in 1989, the K-12 curricula was upgraded with a far greater demand on linguistic skills, and this naturally favored the girls. This would be okay if there was acknowledgement that the boys would need additional help, but that didn't happen. So boys fell behind, and there was no plan to develop the skills of boys. And yet we know that the IQs of boys and girls is equivalent. So the boys are capable of catching up if given the proper regimen, but the curriculum was never designed to enable the boys to catch up. Well, this is an American problem. European countries have already sorted this out. They require far more rigorous training in phonics at an early age for the boys, and then continuous coaching and discipline regarding homework. It's working there. So the U.S. could implement a solution, but we haven't. And do the math since 1989. This is over 30 years now we've been doing this. Well, if you have an aggrieved mindset, you could blame radical feminism, and you could jump to the conclusion that it's strictly from the K-12 curricula emphasis by federal act. But there could be other reasons, and one you could argue is that the vast majority of teachers are women, that they grew up with communication. They grew up with a communication advantage, starting at age 2. And it might just be that, hey, they lack a deep understanding of little boys' natural communication struggles. But that's been going on for a long time. I mean, when I was a little kid, most of my school teachers were women. And yet when I was at university, it was 50-50 men and women. Well, now for the punchline. If you've been on the receiving end as a boy, does the root cause of the problem really matter? It won't change the circumstances. And if you're still behind women in your communication skills, regardless of where you're at in life, if you've been to university, if you haven't, if you're a young man, it's your problem now. And you either have to deal with it or be crippled by it. So what's your plan? What are you going to do to improve your communication skills? All right, let's look at misandry in media. Any guy on a planet with a TV set or a computer is aware that the media degrades men. There are no shows like Father Knows Best, Gunsmoke, or Bonanza today, and it's clear that all forms of media slam men, and it doesn't matter if it's in movies, TV shows, comic strips, or even on greeting cards. There's an unwritten rule. It's okay to call men stupid, uncivilized, incompetent, or what have you, but you never do the same thing with the gender roles reversed. I'll give one example. This one's a biggie. It was the 2022 Super Bowl commercial by Gillette. It plays on Gillette's catch frame, the best a man can get. Well, in the commercial, it takes that and then overlays bullying, the Me Too movement, sexual assault and sexual harassment, mansplaining, making excuses, and then the tune, "Boys will be boys." Well, the commercial then asks, is this the best a man can get? It then goes on to show a few men acting as protectors of the oppressed with the statement that some men are not enough. Well, the clear implication is that only a few men are doing the right things, while all these other men are oppressors, misogynists. It's just one small example. You can find a million others, but the message is that the majority of men are defective, toxic. The media and the changes to our societal institutions creates cultural programming. And many women today feel that they're better than men, that they deserve better than men. For women 30 years old and younger, they are already out earning men, and if they don't like their professional wages, many of them turn to OnlyFans to make more, which is kind of an indication of the sex positivity movement of the third wave feminism. Just imagine a heterosexual guy trying to make money on OnlyFans. He'd be a laughingstock. Well, any man who's spent any time dating has experienced the cultural shift, and the vast majority of men have sort of experienced this sentiment that the woman sitting across from him feels that he's beneath her. We've become a society that's lost respect for the vast majority of men, and it's common for most women to feel entitled to deserve only the best men, even though the average woman is 5'3" and 172 pounds. And I don't want to make that sound like a slam on women, but there needs to be some kind of reciprocity in what constitutes a quality woman and what constitutes a quality man. Well, in summary, there's disdain for men in part of society, and it's in television and the media. It's in our educational system. It's in the laws and the courts that favor women. Marriage has become a liability for men, and it's become standard operating procedure for women to look at the majority of men as unworthy. Well, in 2022, there was 39,000 suicides, and men outnumbered women 4-1. So clearly society is not working for men. Yet both men and women, we need relationships, which is part of the reality therapy concept of connecting. And we both need to put forth effort to win in life, which is the reality therapy concept of power. So if you're a man, misandry has reached you in one way or another. And if you're a woman, has misandry crept into your life? Have you noticed the way society is? Well, this is a deep subject, and I'm no real expert. I'd like to learn more, and I am definitely willing to dive deeper if you want me to. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. Thanks for joining. Cheers.